Welcome to today's webinar, a look at pre-kindergarten across the country, brought to you by NCSL. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Allison May. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important webinar. My name is Allison May, and I'm a research analyst with the Early Care and Education Project at the National Conference of State Legislatures. On behalf of NCSL, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar titled A Look at Pre-Kindergarten Across the Country. In addition to our wonderful presenters today, I am joined by my colleague, Jenny Palmer.
Hello.
For those of you who don't know, the National Conference of State Legislatures is a bipartisan organization that serves the legislators and legislative staff from all states, commonwealths, and territories. NCSL provides research, technical assistance, and opportunities for policymakers to exchange ideas on the most pressing state issues. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange, and we are aiming to make the next 60 minutes together as interactive as possible. Feel free to type your questions at any point in the Q&A box, which you'll see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and be sure to specify which speaker you are addressing. To begin some building of comfortability with the chat function and to also learn who's on the line today, I invite everyone to type in the state from which they're calling. All right. I want to briefly mention the resources. At the top right of your screen, you'll see an icon that looks like a square piece of paper with a play button on it. And as you mouse over this icon, you'll see the words, Show Me the Media Library. If you click on this icon, you'll be able to access a PDF of the slide deck and other relevant handouts. In order to access the URLs you'll see within the presentation, please access and download the PDF, and then you can view the links that we've included within the presentation. Today's webinar is the second of two webinars this summer that are part of NCSL's Early Learning Fellows program. Because pre-kindergarten is a topic of interest to many, we've opened registration to a wider audience, including others that are not part of the Early Learning Fellows program. Since this webinar is part of the Early Learning Fellows program, we will prioritize and ask questions coming from our fellows first. On your screen, you can learn a bit about NCSL's Early Learning Fellows program, which began in 2011. Our current class is the 7th cohort and is composed of 30 legislators and 5 legislative staff representing 23 different states. Participants were selected through a rigorous application process. Many were able to participate in our kickoff meeting this June, a webinar last month, and a final meeting that will take place later this month. Since inception, over 200 NCSL members have participated in this program, and if you're interested in learning more, I invite you to visit our website. Today we're going to hear from 2 experts about pre-kindergarten and learn more about some of the key findings from the 2017 State Preschool Yearbook. You will learn about calculating cost for quality and hear from a legislative colleague who has worked directly with improving quality and access to pre-kindergarten in their state. In just a moment, I'll turn the webinar over to our presenters, but first I just want to tell you who you'll be hearing from. We're pleased to have Lori Connors-Tadros, Senior Project Director at the Center on Enhancing Early Learning Outcomes, also known as CEELO. Previously, she was the Vice President of Children and Family Services at the Finance Project and has conducted research in the areas of family impact on children's learning, family literacy, and cultural implications on teacher preparation. Additionally, we have Karen Garver, an Early Childhood Education Policy Specialist at NEAR, the National Institute for Early Education Research. Prior to NEAR, Karen spent almost 16 years with the New Jersey Department of Education in multiple roles, including a deep involvement in the development of the preschool section of New Jersey's school funding formula. She now leads the NEAR yearbook work, and we're pleased to have her on the webinar. Sorry. That is my user error. I apologize. We also are happy to have on the phone with us today Representative Terry Collins from the great state of Alabama. She chairs the House Committee on Education in Alabama. She's also been quite involved with NCSL over the years, participating in the Early Learning Fellows Program in 2014, and is actively involved in a couple different NCSL legislative working groups currently, and is a frequent participant at many of our meetings. We'll now hear from Lori from CEELO. Lori, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. I am actually not able to advance the slides for some reason, so if you're going to need to advance them for me, I'm sorry.
Okay, just say next slide and I'll do it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it, and welcome to everybody on the line. We are, as Allison introduced you, from the National Institute for Early Education Research, which is at the Rutgers University in New Jersey. And I direct the Center on Enhancing Early Learning Outcomes. I'll tell you a tiny bit about that. You can go to the next slide. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Education as part of a comprehensive center network. Our mission is to strengthen the capacity of state education agencies and other state early learning agencies to lead sustained improvements in early learning outcomes for children birth through third grade. So we work on the ground across the country, including the territories, with policymakers in state government, taking the research and helping them to both craft and implement policy that can improve children's experiences before kindergarten and then once they enter kindergarten up to third grade. Next slide, please.
Hey, Lori, if you want to try to advance the slide, I think we might have fixed the problem. Do you want to try or should I continue?
It now, yes. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Today, Karen and I will address at a pretty high level 5 key points here. What we see from the research and our experience in policy about what's important about designing pre-K programs so they are successful for children, they use public funds wisely, and they result in kind of improved life outcomes, if you will, for young children. We're going to talk to you about state policy to reach those goals and how NEAR has been tracking these quality standards for 15 years now. Very critical, as you all know, is money drives what we're able to do, and when we use funds correctly and wisely, matched to our policy goals, we're able to reach those goals. So I'll share a little bit about cost and financing, and Alabama is actually an excellent example about how they've used a good understanding of cost to drive access to their high-quality pre-K program. I'll point out a few states that, for those across the country that are joining us who might want to know more about other states that are using pre-kindergarten policy and funding to drive equity for young children and their families. And then I'll talk about a few opportunities with the Every Student Succeeds Act and some resources from CEELO and NEAR that you could use in your own state. So the first question, while there is a growing interest in pre-K, and we certainly have some very good examples of successful pre-K programs, we usually get asked, why do some programs succeed and others fail? Really, really critical to design your program based on the evidence about what is important for improving children's outcomes. We have some really excellent examples of that, including, as I mentioned, Alabama, but North Carolina, Arkansas, Georgia, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oklahoma. These are states that have been implementing for quite a number of years a high-quality program. They've sustained it over time, focused on implementation, and now have results, many of them into 8th grade and beyond. However, the effects of pre-K during that year only persist and continue to show up when quality is relatively high. Remembering that particularly public and state-funded pre-K programs are typically targeted to those children that are most vulnerable. And so young children that are in circumstances that place them at risk are often showing up to pre-kindergarten already delayed for a variety of life circumstances. And the pre-K program is a booster shot, but certainly cannot be expected to maintain those gains unless the kindergarten, first, second, and third grade are of high quality and families are continued to be supported. So in essence, we can think about this is that some programs succeed and others fail, either because their design is poor. For example, a very few hours a week program that is not of high quality cannot be expected to be a significant booster shot for those children most at need, or we pay insufficient attention to the implementation of quality standards and how we need to support state policy and state standards at every level within the system, right down to the child and the teacher in any particular classroom. And that's, in essence, what we're going to focus on for the rest of the talk. What do you need to do to implement well? So we've had, really, as I mentioned, in 2002 or so was when we first started had identified a set of quality standards based on the research. And over the last 15 years, we've had an increasing amount of very good, solid research on the impact and potential impact of high-quality preschool. And so as we look to the future and look to the new century, we really want to focus on implementation and access to high quality. So that begins with a very coherent vision and goals for quality. Recently, an analysis was done of a number of states, what was their definition of school readiness, and there were 17 different definitions. Extremely important for everybody to be focused on a clear set of goals. Then to have sufficient and stable resources. I am sure you as state legislators wrestle with this challenge each year given the recession or budget cycles or competing priorities. But sufficient and stable resources are more or less the necessary but not totally sufficient ingredients in order to achieve outcomes for young children. Really need to build capacity for local systems change so that children are supported not only with a high-quality pre-K program or preschool program, families are supported with the services that they need so that they can show up at the school door ready to learn. States need data to inform their policy and practice so they can make adjustments along the way, determining that one group of children, for example, are not doing as well as expected, so teachers may need more training in that area. So really important to, I would say, focus on these four elements of implementation and really focus all the attention, resources, and effort around these systemic levers that drive change and improve outcomes for young children. Most importantly, begin early before pre-K if possible and keep at it through kindergarten through third grade. And that's why we at CEELO and many others across the country are focusing birth to third grade, recognizing that we all share responsibility for supporting children and families in this very critical period. They really are our best investment in the future of our country. Recently, a group of national researchers and other stakeholders were convened by New America Foundation to identify what were the indispensable, the most critical policies and practices for high-quality pre-K, recognizing that legislators are looking for what is the best bet, if you will, for their efforts and for their funding. And these three practices around the positive interactions with children and families, to really focus on child development and differentiate instruction across ages and to promote social emotional development and self-regulation are the three practices, if you did nothing else, could support young children's healthy development. And the three policies reinforce a lot of what I just previously said around allocating increased, predictable, and sufficient sustainable funding for early childhood programs. I'll speak a little bit more about this later, but many states have 4 or 5 different funding streams, and programs at the ground level face an incredible burden of patching together the funds to offer a comprehensive program. Educators are the heart of what can happen with young children, and we need to focus much more on the human capital and then to use data for continuous improvement. I think that there's a really cool interactive toolkit online that I think is going in the chat box, so that's just a resource for you. I usually use this slide when I present around the country, and when people ask, why are we not getting what we want? We need to do a better job for our young children. And in essence, this is system slides taken from leadership gurus, if you will. Your system, any system, is perfectly designed to produce the results you are obtaining. So if you're not happy with the results, you need to change what you're doing and change the focus of the system. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Karen Garver. She will share with you some of the findings from our State of Preschool Yearbook, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about financing a little bit later. Thank you. Karen?
Thanks so much, Lori. I'm so happy to be here today to share more about NEAR's State of Preschool Yearbook. The yearbook was first developed by NEAR in 2002, really in response to a lack of comprehensive information on state-funded preschool programs. The state-funded preschool programs included in the yearbook are administered and primarily funded by states for predominantly 3- and or 4-year-olds and with an educational goal. So in other words, child care programs generally are not included in the yearbook. That first State of Preschool Yearbook in 2002 established a baseline against which we now can compare progress year over year. Annual data collection has continued for 15 years now, with the most recent report covering the 16-17 school year. So as a result, NEAR has a wonderful data set covering a decade and a half of state preschool program progress. Yearbook information is presented on 3 key characteristics of preschool programs, which are access, quality standards, and resources. We provide information on trends over time, so changes in enrollment, spending, and quality standards benchmarks between 2002 and 2017. Last year, NEAR introduced a revised set of quality standards benchmarks to shift focus from structural to process quality, but I'll talk more about that a little bit later. There are 3 general sections to the yearbook. First is the executive summary, which compares data across states and provides policy recommendations. The executive summary is really a great place for you to get a national perspective on the status of state preschool programs. Then the next section is the state-specific profile pages, which cover program structure, major changes, funding, enrollment, and quality standards specific to each state's programs. The profile pages really are an incredibly rich source of data for information on your specific state or on other states in your region. And finally, the last section of the yearbook is the yearbook appendices, which are a full data set of the yearbook survey questions, along with every state's responses to the yearbook survey questions, including some that aren't included in the profile pages. Plus, there's additional information and data on Head Start, special education, and census figures by state. So there's a lot of rich data in the appendices. Through the yearbook survey, NEAR has collected important information about the changes in state-funded preschool program policies over the last 15 years. Highlighted here are a few of the most prominent examples. As you can see, we've made huge progress in areas like access for 4-year-olds and overall spending, but we have a lot of progress yet to make in areas like access for 3-year-olds and per-child spending. There's a bit of a more detailed breakdown on the overall enrollment information reported in the yearbook in 2017. So although our state programs are serving over 1.5 million preschool children, the vast majority of those children are 4 years old. Our research shows the benefits and gains children receive from 2 years versus 1 year of high-quality preschool, but to date, our state programs are serving just 5% of 3-year-olds across the nation. I mentioned earlier that NEAR recently revised the yearbook's quality standards benchmarks. The original quality standards benchmarks were designed to reflect what research suggested was important for high-quality programs. The benchmarks were never intended to guarantee quality, but rather to identify the minimum resources necessary to support high quality and then drive states towards stronger policies to support those resources. The revised standards still assess minimum quality standards for state preschool programs, but now put a heavier focus on process quality and reflect more recent research on effective early childhood education. you might think of the change as the nuance between the existence of a policy and then how that policy is implemented. So for example, the old benchmarks said that teachers should receive at least 15 hours of professional development each year. But the new benchmark goes a step further to say that those 15 hours should address the unique needs of each teacher. So teachers should receive at least 15 hours of individualized, high-quality training geared to help them improve their own practice and then in turn improve child outcomes and program quality. The 4 benchmarks you see highlighted on this slide were either enhanced or added to address process quality, and I'll describe them each in a little bit more detail. Before I do that, I just wanted to give you this overall map, which gives you an at-a-glance view of how many states were able to meet some or all of the 4 process quality-focused benchmarks. Almost 30 states were able to meet 3 or 4 of those 4 benchmarks, but 20 states met 2 or fewer. Preschool Early Learning and Development Standards, often called ELDS, detail what preschool-age children should know and be able to do during their preschool years in domains or areas such as social and emotional development, English language arts, science, math, technology, health and safety, among many others. The old NEAR benchmark called for comprehensive ELDS to meet all appropriate domains, but the new benchmark now goes beyond that to require SLDS that are aligned, properly supported, and culturally sensitive. SLDS provide the blueprint for high-quality instruction, so it's really important to measure the effectiveness of state policies that support their quality and their use. And in the 2017 yearbook, about 52 state programs met the ELDS standard. The Curriculum Supports Benchmark is new to NEAR's Quality Standards benchmarks. In order to meet this benchmark, states have to provide support to their programs in the areas of both curriculum selection and implementation. A high-quality preschool program guides teachers on how to address the SLDS in ways that are developmentally appropriate for preschool-age children, but it's only effective if it's well implemented. So this benchmark pushes states to ensure that their programs are not only choosing high-quality curricula, but they're then implementing their curricula well. And this standard in 2017 was met by about 52 of our state-funded programs. The benchmark on staff professional development I mentioned earlier, it's actually proven to be one of the more difficult standards for states to meet. The goal of this benchmark is to push states to reinforce strong instruction in preschool classrooms through individualized professional development and in-class supports for both teachers and teacher assistants. Right now, only 9 programs are meeting this standard, so we're really eager to see state policies shift to address this critical issue. And as Lori mentioned, those teacher-child interactions are one of the most important aspects of a high-quality preschool program, so this is one that we'll be watching closely in future years. NEAR's benchmark on continuous quality improvement systems changed slightly from the prior year to call attention to the systematic collection of data to improve program quality. To meet this benchmark, programs have to have an intentional and systematic approach to classroom observations, and then policies to use the resulting data at both state and local levels to drive program improvement. The idea here is that we want to see intentionality both around the collection of data and also its use to improve program quality. So we're not just collecting data to collect data, we're collecting data to then drive better program implementation. Each year, the yearbook survey includes a supplemental section on an area of particular interest or concern to the field. The 2016-17 State of Preschool Survey included supplemental questions intended to shed some light on state policies to support dual language learners in state-funded preschool programs. Nationwide, young dual language learners comprise almost a quarter of the preschool-aged population, and dual language learner children reside in every state in the nation. But yet our data show that only 26 state preschool programs even collect data on children's home language. Without that data, it's really unlikely that programs are going to be able to implement policies to support effective classroom practices for dual language learner children. So again, this is another area where we'll be keeping a close eye in future years. Before moving on to some information about preschool spending and cost modeling, I wanted to give you a preview of changes NEAR is making for the 2018 yearbook survey. As I mentioned, each year the yearbook contains a supplemental survey. In 2018, the supplemental survey will address questions related to the preschool workforce. This will be the second time a workforce supplement is being collected. The first was in 2016. And while we'll ask many of the same questions that were asked in 2016, we have some additional questions and some revised questions to provide a clearer portrait of state preschool program policies that specifically relate to the preschool workforce. The survey questions will focus on policies related to salary and benefit parity, paid time for planning, meetings, and professional development, as well as professional supports provided to teachers and teacher assistants. And what we're looking for is to see state policies around parity between preschool teachers and K-12 teachers and teacher assistants. Completely new to the yearbook this year are questions related to policies on chronic absenteeism, suspension, expulsion, continuation of preschool expansion grant enrollment slots, and the existence or status of early childhood integrated data systems. Each of these new questions are meant to address emerging policy issues around the nation, and we regularly revisit all of the questions in NEAR's yearbook survey on an annual basis, pull questions in, delete questions and add questions based on emerging issues around the nation. So before I pass back to Lori, I wanted to share a bit about what we're seeing related to the funding side of state preschool. We saw earlier that state spending on preschool programs now exceeds $7.6 billion, with all reported funding, which includes federal and local sources, now reaching $8.65 billion. But for the first time in several years, we've recorded a slight decrease in the inflation-adjusted per-child spending. So even though we have states that are increasing their per-child spending within the nation, the vast majority are decreasing their per-child spending. So we're seeing an increase in enrollment and funding that's not keeping pace with that increased enrollment. This next slide reinforces the really distinct variation we see in per-child spending across the nation. New Jersey and D.C., for example, spend well upwards of $10,000 per child, but states like Nevada, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Florida all spend less than $3,000 per child, and that's even without adjusting for state cost of living. So as you can see, there are pretty stark variations in the resources that are put into preschool programs across the nation. And with that lead-in, I'm going to pass back to Lori, who's going to dig deeper into what drives preschool costs and, more importantly, what drives the cost of preschool quality. Lori?
Thank you so much, Karen.
Lori,
yes.
This is Allison. I wonder, Karen, if you might be able to quickly, I saw a question come in the chat box that it feels like it would be nice to clarify this. What all goes into the per-child spending?
Right. So there are actually two different per-child spending amounts that are reported in the yearbook. The one that you're seeing here is state spending on state preschool programs, but the yearbook also reports on all spending per child in a state, which would include federal and local sources as well. So the yearbook actually collects data on both of those variables.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. And as we move into this section, the purpose of this section of really thinking about costs and financing is to go back to what I earlier said about how do we ensure we are designing for success. So the point being that more money is not necessarily what we're after. We're looking to see that we are funding adequately for the expectations we have of the program, the needs of the children served. So here you'll see that why does it cost so much to serve a young child in a high-quality program? The salaries and wages, it takes up quite a bit of the per-child cost. However, I know you all have been quite made aware of the variation in compensation for preschool teachers and child care teachers. So, for example, a child care worker would be making about $10 per hour versus an elementary teacher making about $33 per hour. And for young children, they need two teachers in a classroom, possibly not both at the same pay level. The other is that a very important priority of preschool and early education is typically using mixed delivery settings. So it may not be that you're using a school and thus have a space, a facility, or you need to ensure that the space is matched to the quality and the expectations and the needs of young children. So here we're going to talk about, in addition to the NEAR yearbook standards, the work we've been doing to provide better and more precise data regarding what is the expected cost of a high-quality preschool program. How could you as state policymakers ensure that costs are commensurate with the outcomes you want to achieve and plan for that in the future? You do want to design your program first and then estimate the cost per child. Costs are going to vary, of course, by the children that you're served, whether they're children with special needs or dual language learners, and plan in a thoughtful way for expansion. So I know Representative Collins is on the line. This is a fantastic example. In 2012, we did a cost study for them where they were just launching their first-class pre-K program, which meets all 10 standards. We helped them understand both what were the costs and how could they maximize and leverage current federal and other funds in order to expand access over 10 years. And we just met with them yesterday, and they are at 35% on their way to reaching about 70% of children served. So extremely important to do a cost study so you have sound data on what it is projected to cost and how you could plan for the increased resources over time. From there, you then can create an adequate and stable funding formula. We won't have time to go into too much of the details, but I'm going to show that to you a little bit. Okay, there we go. I'm going to show you a little bit about the fact that getting behind the black box of funding early care and education is quite an education in and of itself, and looking at any state, which I won't call out any state, the way that is funded is sometimes called insanity and other times called how could we make any sense of the puzzle. So really, really important as legislators and those on the line to think carefully about both costs and what is the mechanism by which you can efficiently and stably get funds out to programs to deliver a quality program. Because of this need, CEELO developed a tool to drive data. It's called the Cost of Preschool Quality and Revenue Tool. It's a tool that identifies the ingredients of cost, both from the state infrastructure level, at the local system level, and at the provider level, allows you to project costs based on quality standards. This is a free tool, and I'll tell you how you can get it in a moment. But right now I want to show you a little bit about both how we think about costs and how we then can help you think about how you maximize revenue. In this model, it's called an ingredient model. We derive from quality standards. That's designing for success, and then you project your costs based on that. Critically important to think about what is needed at a state level in terms of administrative functions to support both the efficient allocation of those funds, the monitoring of those funds, the quality improvement of those funds. We're working with the state of Washington right now. They have legislation that all eligible children will have access to their pre-K program for disadvantaged children by 2023. So that program has expanded exponentially over the last 20 years, but resources at the state to monitor those public funds that are going to go into increasing access have not been commensurate. So we're working with them to see what is the right and adequate funds in order to support efficient and effective use of dollars. And then the impact on the provider. Providers at the system level, whether that's a school or a district or a private provider, typically are putting together a variety of different funding sources that might come from their local community, from parent tuition or co-pay, from the state, and the burden on them to blend and braid is significant, while it does help them leverage so that they are able to meet the range of needs for families. So this tool helps you take a look at that. Then it helps you take a look at all the different funding sources and their various requirements and eligibility, and put that together in a map to show what are the funds you have, what are the funds you need. And I can give you more information, but I don't want to spend too much time. This is an example of Kentucky, and I'm not sure if anyone from Kentucky is on the line right now, but they had not done a cost study, and basically each year the legislators appropriate a certain amount of funds. They divide it by the number of children they expect to serve, and that's the allocation that each district would receive. That wasn't sufficient. They believed it wasn't sufficient, and legislators wanted better data. So they prioritized quality that focused on ensuring teacher-child interactions, which the research says is what drives outcomes for children, and specialized support for children and families because they serve a significant number of children with special needs. So you can see here that they determined and defined their levels of quality first, and then they costed it out. And this data has been used by legislators and other stakeholders to both educate and inform those that are both appropriating funds and using funds. And while it wasn't able to result in a big increase in the past legislative session, it was able to actually inform budget decisions in a difficult budget cycle. This is another example of data being developed for policymakers, legislators to use in Indiana a few years ago when they had no pre-K program, and they were determining how they were going to start to begin to increase access. And we helped them collect data that they used to inform a program called Pre-K My Way that actually comes out of the Child Care Fund, but added some state-level dollars, and we were able to help them determine what was the appropriate per-child allocation based on the standards that they wanted to utilize. And this is the way, this type of data allows you to make smart and wise policy decisions rather than kind of blanket across the board decisions that then do not result in the expectations you might have for outcomes for children. As we all know, finances is very challenging. There are lots of needs. I'm sure as legislators you are dealing with needs of a lot of your constituents. There are limited resources, and we do have difficult choices. A recent National Academy report showed that the system receives about 1/3 of the public funding that would be needed to ensure equitable access to high-quality early education and care. This report was looking at birth to 5 now, not just pre-K. In general, states do underestimate the cost to administer and improve quality, and we definitely underestimate and expect a high level of burden on local programs who really are those frontline people hearing from families and the kinds of needs that they have. So regarding this kind of two sides of the coin, really critical to keep that in mind with quality. Our goal cannot be only increasing access. It has to be increasing access to quality in order to receive outcomes. I'm going to go kind of quickly between among these last few slides so we give Representative Collins sufficient time because I think she has a really important story to tell. But here you can actually see in the green, these are states that do provide some general revenues. The lighter green are those that use a school funding formula, which generally is considered more stable and sustainable. There's a couple of states that have no funds, but generally we're primarily supporting state-funded pre-K through general revenues from the state, whether it's an allocation or through school funding formulas. However, on the ground, public preschool, which includes Head Start and child care, is using a variety of different resources. And again, if you go back to the PowerPoint, you can kind of dig into this, but I'm going to skip over it for now. These are states, and for some reason New Jersey was left off here, that are using a school funding formula. Not all of those are created equal. We can certainly provide anybody with further information, but generally, schools, including pre-K, 4-year-olds, and sometimes 3-year-olds in the school funding formula does allow for sustainable funding, and then we're able to kind of ensure that those children do have access to high quality. I was going to point out just a couple of states that are likely to succeed, and those on the phone, if your state's not mentioned, happy to talk with you further. These states that are very strong currently, I put them here because they both have high-quality standards, they have sufficient funding, they also have sufficient infrastructure at the state level to support effective implementation at the local level. This is really, really important. Other states to look to are Arkansas and Maryland, have had programs for a very long time, do have results long term. Michigan, New York, and West Virginia. As I mentioned, Washington, they're really doing some fantastic work. They've got a great opportunity to ensure access to all children, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but I will say to you that it is a combination of legislation, which provides the standards, some funding typically, and a strong voice and authority and role for state folks, and sufficient attention to implementation to be successful. There is an opportunity about to come out very shortly in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which will be the preschool development grant focused on birth to 5 systems building. It's an opportunity to not only address early care and education, but to take stock of your system, birth to 5, and identify ways that you can improve it. All states and territories are eligible for this. I'm happy to provide other information at the end. I do think looking at your Every Student Succeeds Act in your state, which for the first time did include and allow early childhood, in particular preschool, to access Title I funds, had there certain requirements around that, and Title II funds. Really important opportunity to use those federal funds and match them with the goals in your state and the funds in your state to ensure that early learning is a driver of equity and helps you turn back some of the challenges we see, for example, at 3rd grade, reading proficiency and that kind of thing. I won't go into this again because I want to be respectful of time. On your slides, you'll see there's a variety of tools we have about communicating the value and benefits of early care and education. We have a ton of resources on our website, both on CEELO.org and NEAR.org, that you all can access, and we would be happy to work with you in coming up with the particular response and resources and information that you will need in your state. So I want to thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm going to turn this back to Allison.
That was great. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Karen. That was really informative. I'm going to pivot in 1 second, but first, while you guys are still here, wanted to ask, we had a representative from Illinois who says, has anyone determined the effect of more money on outcomes? Is there a strong or weak correlation? I wonder if either of you want to address that briefly or make any comments to that question briefly.
There hasn't been, I'll make a comment, there hasn't been a study that I know of on pre-K. However, I have read some studies that throwing more money at something does not necessarily result in better outcomes. It's exactly what I said at the beginning, which is identifying your quality standards, ensuring you have sufficient but not excessive necessarily resources to meet what your expectations are. So I hope I didn't give a message about more money is only the answer. I hope I gave a message that you have adequate money to meet the quality standards that you set and the expectations you have of a program.
Okay. Thank you. I do see a few other questions, but we're going to move right along and come back to them in the end. Next up, we have Representative Terry Collins, who's going to share some thoughts related to pre-kindergarten in her state, the state of Alabama. Representative Collins, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed listening to the conference call and had a couple of comments about the discussion that's been previously had. One thing I would say, in my view and opinion, which is not evidence-based, but that the effect of more money, especially if you have a high-quality program, would be that you would increase your access to the children. And that, to me, is going to be the biggest difference of adding more money to it, is that you're wanting more and more children to have access, especially if it's high quality, because that's the key. I am a state representative in Alabama, and I have been an advocate for our early learning the entire time I've been elected. When I was elected in 2010, I was hearing wonderful things about the quality of the pre-K program. We were nationally ranked number one, and, we like that in Alabama, so that's a really good thing. And so I was anxious to hear more about it. And so as I studied, I wanted to take the access issue and expand on that at a statewide level, but also at a local level. And so I'm kind of going to start that way and end that way. And so in Alabama, they built a key of advocates using business people and educators and moms and dads and just all kinds of different people who have been an advocate that this makes a difference. And in my community, it was such a strong voice that we actually started other groups that would raise money, one looking at a Women's Leadership Council under United Way. And a lady actually left us in her will as an endowment, and we're actually using that funding right now for this. So I will end with that. But starting locally, but also at that state level, and then trying to meet in the middle has been my goal. But what we started with that's been most exciting in Alabama was that high quality. If you don't want to see the fade out, if you want to see the growth, then you have to find ways to maintain and sustain that high quality. One of the things that we do that's a little different, and I've not heard it mentioned yet, but that our pre-K is not housed under the Department of Education. It's housed in the Office of Early Learning. We have a cabinet-level position secretary who is over our early learning, and I believe that has been very instrumental because it's not just looking at schools, but we have an extremely diverse delivery system. We have, even in my local area, we have pre-Ks in schools. We have them right beside a Title I pre-K where they may combine professional development. We have them in faith-based institutions. We have one in a project area so that because transportation is such a barrier, they can actually leave their home and walk to early learning. So trying to put pre-K where the people that need them live has been one of the newer strategies that we've looked at. What we've done with ours that's also made a big is each year in our budget, I serve on the education budget, and we try to incrementally increase the funding that we're able to give every year. While it would be wonderful to say, well, let's just do it and fund everybody, that's not doable in a current environment for our economy. And so what we're doing is that we've tried to make, and I will estimate between $10 and $20 million increases every single year. And two good things about that. First of all, we're increasing areas, we're grassroots building infrastructure, but we're also able to maintain the quality as we move along in that path. And I think that's been great. Knowing the difference, one of the three characteristics I heard earlier that were primary indispensable factors was the sustainable, count on that funding. So that once you get that grant for pre-K, you don't have to worry, will I get it next year? We're working on increasing that grant funding, not so that it's not a worry for sustainability. The other thing, one of the second points that they made was about the data. And our pre-K has actually worked with a PARCA, which is a research institution in Birmingham in Alabama, and had them actually study their data so that they can look. We've got areas where almost none of the children were proficient when they came in, and as they left, they were like 80% proficient. We've got some counties in very low economic areas that were like 30% and 40%, and they are all at 95 and 98% now ready for school, which is that equity that we can't do any other way. And so I do think this is the way that we want to go. By having the program in our Office of Early Learning, another thing it's able to do is kind of break down silos. so that we may work in this office with professional development, not only for our pre-K, but maybe for our Head Start classes that are right beside it, maybe even to our child care facilities going on that 0 to 4 and 5 area, but also working on assessment with our kindergarten and our first grade, so that we're taking that high quality and we're pushing it both ways, both younger and to the older children and for their teachers. The ways that we've been successful, I think, have been to build those coalitions. And one of the best comments I can make on how well that has worked is every year before legislative session, we hear budget hearings, which is basically the time where everybody comes before the budget committee and says they want more money. But this year, for the very first time, our Department of Education, K-12, started their discussion by saying, yes, we're going to talk about the funding we want, but we know the power and the influence of funding pre-K. Our community college started their budget request saying, we also see the difference of funding pre-K. And even our higher education started out that. They're all about to ask for the same dollars and their percentage, but they all claim the quality and the difference that pre-K makes. And so I think that's great. When I started in 2010, we had about 6% access statewide. I think I just heard that we're about 35%, and we added $18.5 million this time, so I'll be anxious to see what that looks like on our percentages. But we are increasing it. We are increasing it at a way that's sustainable, that's reaching the children, and we're moving that professional development by sharing that with children that are younger through different means and through the schools where the children are a little bit older. It's making a big difference. Everyone, when you go to a budget committee and you advocate in any way for another group to get money, you know that is making a difference, and I'm very pleased with that. And then I wanted to end that locally, we had a huge pre-K emphasis in my area, and every year we would apply for the grants for the state, and then my area would use local dollars to what we call Jumpstart Hours. So we are really close to that 100% of voluntary, which means it may look like more 65 to 75% of the children, but many of the other children may be going to their own private church care or something that's also high quality. But as we raise that percentage, we know that we're making a difference. And this new early learning center that we were able to purchase and we're going to work with in North Alabama area, it's going to have a 4-year-old pre-K. It's going to have a federal Head Start class with high quality curriculum and teaching. It's going to have child care and even home visiting as a part of it, working with both our community college and our higher education. And so I think as we all work together, that's how we're going to be successful, starting where you are in your community and building it and growing it, and then working with your state to incrementally grow it in a high-quality way that's proven. I mean, when I look at our Alabama charts and I see that we are 10 out of 10 on standards, I'm extremely pleased. And I commend those that work in that Office of Early Learning. I believe I saw Tracy on here. Alabama's program is all voluntary. It's not universal. That is actually true. And but it's working and it's making a difference. And I'm happy once questions come to answer anything as well. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. Representative Collins, that was great. I hope everyone on the line, learned as much as I just learned. I know we've seen a few questions coming in the chat box. I want to encourage everyone, if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the box. We're going to prioritize what is coming on, and right now I'm just going to turn to Jenny, who's going to ask a question of the representative.
Yeah, Representative Horn from North Carolina had asked about getting your pre-K, early ed folks to work with your K through 3, K through 5 folks. And so I wondered, Representative Collins, if that's something you could comment on, how they have worked together. You mentioned that the higher ed and K-12 folks were being advocates in your coalition, so I just wondered if you could discuss that relationship a little bit.
Well, the advocacy is through an alliance that has worked together, and it's been business people, educators, and all. But they're seeing the difference. And then the pre-K program itself, Office of Early Learning, working with a data provider to study and follow the success of the students that participated in this quality program, that's really made a difference, and it's really got kind of created the buy-in from all the other communities, because they're like, this is that great equalizer. This is what's going to help our students be ready when they get there to be ready to learn and move on up. There are many pieces that can be shared. Like when you've got a great assessment program for your pre-K and you're working with something, helping your kindergarten and your first grade understand that same model, that's very valuable, and we're doing that at a very grassroots level. If they want to participate, they're offering that through that Office of Early Learning. And then they're also starting to work on the backwards. They've always done a great job partnering with a Head Start provider or something to combine some professional development and keeping those teachers providing excellent professional development of how they can provide better learning for our students. Those were the 3 parts that they mentioned as indispensable, and I agree with that as well. Sustainable dollars, good data to prove what you're doing is working or if you need to tweak it, and then great professional development. I hope that answered the question.
Jenny, I would add to that a couple of things. Certainly support what Representative Collins said, but this particular issue around the pre-K to K transition, there are some opportunities, and actually Alabama's governor really focused on this in these kind of institutes, leadership institutes that brought together the pre-K and early childhood community with principals. And I think that we have to recognize that this issue of children coming from pre-K to K is in part sometimes new for principals, elementary principals, and they need education and support in understanding what is needed. The second, I breezed over it a little bit, but any school that is receiving Title I funds, whether they fund a pre-K or not, is required in the Every Student Succeed Act to develop a coordination agreement with Head Start and other early care and education entities in their community, and much of the focus is around the transition, and there are resources that I put in our PowerPoints. I do think that the representative who raised that question, this is very, very important to getting at that sustaining the effects of a high-quality pre-K like in Alabama into kindergarten, and then ensuring that children are successful using data to target their needs, kindergarten through 3rd grade.
That's great. Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that. I apologize, but I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, so I am just going to transition right now to share a few more pieces of information with everyone on the line. I know there are a few questions we didn't get to. We'll send out an email. If you do have additional questions, feel free to continue to place them into the chat box, and we will be responsive to you. I want to mention that the webinar from today will be archived, and a copy will be available on our website very shortly. I want to say a big thank you to all of our presenters. Another thank you to all of our early learning fellows, both current and alum, who were able to join us today for the webinar. To the current cohort, we look forward to seeing you in about a week and a half in Minnesota for our second face-to-face meeting. And again, if you do have questions, please email them to any of my colleagues or in the chat box. We're happy to reconnect with you. At the end of the webinar, you're going to see a brief evaluation survey pop up on your screen. And I would invite you all to just take a few moments and provide some feedback. It really helps us in designing the most meaningful programming in the future. So we take your feedback seriously. Again, thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.